Hi, South Naz. It's great to be with you on this Maundy Thursday. Maundy Thursday is the Thursday of Holy Week, where we remember when Jesus washed the disciples' feet and then had the Passover meal with his disciples in the upper room. Yesterday, Pastor Travis talked to us about that time when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. So today, we're going to look in at what this Passover meal was all about. To fully understand this Passover meal, we need to go back to the Old Testament, to the book of Exodus, chapters 11 and 12, where the very first Passover took place. At this time, the Israelites, God's chosen people, were being held in bondage by the Egyptians. And so God, through the work of Moses, had sent 10 plagues. And this 10th plague was the plague of the firstborn. And what was going to happen was the plague was going to sweep throughout the land of Egypt. And every firstborn in every home was going to be killed. But God had instructed his people to prepare a lamb in a special way. And it's by no chance that it was a lamb that he had asked them to prepare, but to use the blood of that lamb and to wipe it on the doorposts of their home. And in doing that, when that plague swept through the land, it would literally pass over the homes of the Israelites. And in doing that, their firstborn sons would not suffer death through this plague. And God gave his people at this time clear instructions to continue to celebrate the Passover. And so that's where we are with Jesus and his disciples today. They're celebrating this Passover meal in remembrance of this time we just spoke about from the book of Exodus. And see, it wasn't something new or unique for these men. They'd been doing it since their earliest memories. Every year, their families would celebrate the Passover. But this Passover meal was going to be different and unique. They didn't know at the time why, but Jesus knew. You see, it was going to be their last supper together. And at this Passover meal, Jesus did something new and different that they'd never experienced before. In the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you can see this. Jesus takes a cup of wine and tells them to drink it. To do that and remember that that's the blood of the covenant, Jesus' blood. And then he takes the bread, gives thanks, and breaks it, and tells them to eat it, and tells them that it's his body. And he tells them to do all of this in remembrance of him. And see, today, we know what that is all about. It's communion. And we partake in communion often as a church family. We drink the juice and we eat the bread and remember Jesus' sacrifice on the cross so that we could be saved. But I find it interesting when you go to the book of John and you go to look at this Passover time together. You see, John didn't share any of the specifics of the elements that we take at communion. What John did was speak very clearly what Jesus spoke to them during this meal. And he does it in 5 chapters. That's a lot of chapters devoted to just this one meal that Jesus had with his disciples. And there's a theme that runs throughout these 5 chapters of when Jesus was speaking to his disciples during this Passover meal. And that theme is the word love. If you look at the first 12 chapters of John, the word love is used only 6 times. But then in these next 5 chapters, 13 through 17, John uses the word love 31 times. And it's Jesus' words. And so it's clear that Jesus was trying to communicate the need for his disciples to love God and then to love others. And I want to share one of these verses with you today. It's found in John chapter 13, verse 34, and it reads, "Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." So this Holy Week, this time of celebrating the resurrection, I encourage you, yes, remember the communion elements and Jesus' blood that was spilled for us in his broken body, but also take it a step further and ask yourself, how am I doing in loving those around me? Do my actions, do my words show that Jesus is living in my life? Am I loving people the way he has called me to love them? The way he was encouraging his own disciples to do in the book of John. And lastly, I want to share with you verse that is found in chapter 14. It's verse 27. See, when Jesus spoke this verse, he knew what the disciples were going to experience later that night and the next day. But during this Passover meal, he says to them, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. And what I was just blown away this week by was knowing when Jesus spoke those words to the disciples, yes, he was telling them that the Comforter was coming, their advocate, the Holy Spirit. But he was also speaking those words to us today in 2020. Jesus knew right then in that moment when he told them, peace be still, do not worry, don't let your hearts be troubled. He knew today we would need to hear that too. He knew exactly what we'd be going through. So can you imagine with me just loving people the way God has called us to love and living a life of peace and knowing that we don't have to worry or be afraid or let our hearts be troubled?